Hello, and welcome to day 34 of Dungeon 23. Today we'll be making an addition onto this unlocked door, and we're going to be introducing a kind of character and the wandering, reoccurring monster for this level of the dungeon. So, let us quickly sketch out the layout of this room, and from there, we'll go into further detail about what this monster is. Alrighty, very simple room layout. You could go in any four directions, but you do notice that this top doorway right here is actually 3x3, and that's because the monster is a bit big. Now, before we get into the actual monster, let's talk about that weird character. So let us quickly go into our tokens, undead, and we're gonna put down a ghost. So, ghost of the This is the ghost of a adventurer who went missing. Or rather, well, yeah, went missing, but he's right here because he died horribly. Now, what killed him? This adventurer was horribly killed by a hook horror. That is going to be our wandering monster. But before we go into that, let's talk about this guy. He will explain how he was killed by an unseen monster. It's not invisible. It just grabbed him from behind as if it was hanging from the ceiling. Because we don't know, hook horrors have hooks, which means they could climb on stuff, and they have a climb speed of 30 feet, so it's going to be able to climb on the roof of the, not the roof, but the ceiling of the dungeon. The adventurer has forgotten his name and cannot pass on. If the party, let's see here, he will ask the party to retrieve. Let's fix that typo, because that's going to drive me annoying. It's going to drive me nuts. Retrieve his diary in order to rediscover his name. He will tell the party that the room he thinks he died in, although which we'll just randomly determine at a later time. Diary. Here. Nest. So we'll go into more information about the diary and what contains it in this guy's treasure and about him more personally when we actually get to the room that has the hook horror's nest in it. But we're not going to get to that for a while. This is just a setup for the monster that's going to be wandering through. So what we're going to do is we're going to hop over to the Google document I made of this modified hook horror, and I'll explain how it's going to work. And here we are. And as you can see, this hook horror is blind. It is completely blind. It cannot see. It still has its good hearing, but its eyesight is completely shot. It cannot see at all. But first, let's actually go through all of its other characteristics. Of course, the blind hook horror is a name. It is a large monstrosity. That is par for the course. And I have it unaligned. Now, normally, hook horrors are neutral, which is weird to think about. It should just be unaligned, but it is unaligned. This one is unaligned. It has a 14 natural armor because its dexterity is actually low on account of the fact that it's blind and it can't really see around. So it's a little bit easier to hit on a baseline. And its HP is the same as the average for the hook horror, 75, which is a lot for a monster that the party's going to be fighting at second level. This is a CR3 monster, so it would be normally a deadly encounter. But we're going to get to why that's not necessarily the case. Its speed is 30, its climb is 30, so it could keep up with the party pretty easily. Its strength, constitution, and intelligence and wisdom are all the same. Its dexterity is dumped down to -1, which I believe is down from 10, so it's, not very dexterous, as I said, on account of the fact that it can't really see. And I lowered its charisma by 1, just because I like having more so even numbers, and just that it's kind of like, fumbling around. It's not very graceful, it's not very majestic, It has no saves, resistances, immunities, or vulnerabilities. I suppose it's kind of immune to the getting blind condition on account of the fact that it's already blind, but that's besides the point. Its perception is the same, despite the fact that it's blind, because it's mainly hearing based anyway. And senses. Now normally hook horrors have blind sight 60 feet, and then they have dark vision for 120. This hook horror, on account of the fact that it's blind, it simply has the 60 feet of blind sight, and it is blind beyond that radius. So if you're more than 60 feet away from it, it's not gonna see you. Its passive perception is the same, although it may be higher or lower depending on the circumstance. For most things that involve eyesight, it's just gonna automatically fail. So there's no point giving disadvantage because it's automatically gonna fail. And languages that are hook horror, not many people know this, but hook horrors have their own language. Very similar to, not Grix. It's one of the Underdark monsters has its own language. Same thing goes for wargs, like the weird dog things that goblins ride. They have their own language, and they're technically a sentient race, which is weird to think about. But unless you're a wizard and you have the scholar background and you get all those extra exotic languages, you're probably not going to take hook horror. And obviously it doesn't have any tool use, because it's not really an intelligent creature. Although it technically is sentient, it's not super intelligent. Now, this is what's the real meat and potatoes of the monster. Blind. Blind hook horror can't see, obviously, and it automatically fails any ability check that requires sight. It's automatically failing investigation checks, it's automatically failing, not spot hidden, it's called Cthulhu. That's what investigation is anyway. Arcana checks to see spells, although they probably wouldn't succeed anyway. Or even try to in the first place. What matters is it can't see and it's automatically failing any check to see. And this is the real big part. Attacks made against the blind hook horror are made with advantage, and the blind hook horror's attacks are made with disadvantage. So functionally what that means is that 14 armor class, because advantage and disadvantage are a plus and -5 respectively, when you account for just the numerical value. If you get rid of the actual rolling aspect, just use the flat bonus or penalty based on the advantage or disadvantage, then its armor class is 9, and if we scroll down to its attacks, instead of a +6, which is the normal one, it's technically a +1. So this thing's not going to be hitting very often. Assuming your party has some armor, The typical like AC of a player character at like first or second level is usually like 12 to 13. Because you start off with, first of all, dexterity is never a dump stat. Unless you're like a barbarian, you already get, not a barbarian. Unless you're a well, barbarians could have them, but unless you're a fighter who takes the really heavy armor, and then in which case your dexterity doesn't matter because you're just gonna have the flat bonus. But yeah, your the average AC is for your party is gonna be like 12, 13, maybe even higher. So this thing's rarely gonna hit. But when it does hit, it is brutal. And the idea of this monster here is that with its 10-foot range, high damage. Oh, just ignore that stuff at the bottom. That doesn't. Then that stuff's not finished. We'll just erase that. Actually, let's erase that right now. Alright, it's not working for whatever reason. I think my internet connection died. Alright, let me finish explaining this, then we'll connect back to it. So, the idea is that this is a big creature that like climbs on ceilings and sneaks around or whatever, but it can't fit through the 5x5 gap, like the normal small doorways. So the party is gonna have to plan their route based around like, alright, this doorway is 10x10 or 10x5. Or it's a 10-foot doorway, or this one's a 3-foot doorway, or this one here, it's a 5-foot doorway. That means that it's still going to be able to reach through with its like long arms. Now maybe you find like a 2.5-foot doorway, like for a small creature, and the hook horror can't even reach its hand through to like try to swipe at you like it can with the 5-foot doorway. So what this is going to do is it's going to encourage the players to look at their environment, look at the size of the doors, and to just plan ahead and say, okay, this area here is safe because that monster that's wandering around, it can't attack us from here. And like, yeah, it's gonna like hang around outside of the area where you are for a bit, but it's eventually gonna like just realize like, alright, they're not coming out, I'm gonna go harass some goblins or whatever. So yeah, this is our wandering monster for this dungeon. The last one we had kind of had a wandering monster in the haunted armor, but you had to trigger it. This is just a random wandering monster that wanders through the dungeon. It could get through some areas it can't. And it's a good opportunity to have like environmental storytelling to see, well, here's some scratches in the ceiling here, but not in this room because it's clearly can't get through here. Stuff like that. With that said, we do have our third room of the dungeon. Well, it's technically the third room, but it feels like the second because the first room is always going to be the floor going down, so, depends on how you feel about it. But that room done, we have our unnamed ghost there, and we have our wandering monster determined. Again, we'll go into the backstory of those two guys, the unnamed adventurer, and the monster, when we actually make the nest of the monster. And that's probably going to be like day 25, so it's not going to be for a while. But we will be designing this dungeon with that monster in mind, with this monster in mind. So just, if you have any suggestions for cool ways to illustrate its effect on the environment, that would be greatly appreciated. But yeah, that's basically today's episode. Thanks for listening and watching, whatever you're doing. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. And I apologize for the poor quality. It's not going to get any better.